Waking up on a mattress that probably cost more than my entire Brooklyn apartment building was the first red flag. The second was the breakfast menu resting on the mahogany nightstand. It featured vintage O- syrup artisanal raw liver drizzled in truffle oil and absolutely zero pancakes. Yeah, hard pass. I sat up aggressively, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, and took in the sheer suffocating luxury of the penthouse. One moment, I was a Midwest agriculture student who moved to Neo-Manhattan to escape cornfields, spending my nights aggressively grinding farming simulators. The next, a freak metaphysical glitch, decided I belonged in the Obsidian Tower, the monolithic sky-piercing headquarters of the Dark Knight Corporation. In this post-calamity version of America, Wall Street was not run by metaphorical bloodsuckers anymore. They were literal ones. The elites, the Senate, the billionaires, all vampires. And I was officially registered as a premium blood tribute, a glorified walking Capri Sun with a pulse. My survival strategy was simple: lay low, do not make eye contact, and above all, avoid Vincent. Vincent was not just the CEO of Dark Knight. He was the undisputed tyrant of the East Coast. Rumor had it he possessed an obsessive-compulsive need for cleanliness that bordered on psychotic, wore nothing but custom Armani suits, and had once decapitated a board member for breathing too loudly during a quarterly earnings call. He was a high-functioning apex predator with an infinite credit limit. But frankly, I had bigger problems than a brooding billionaire with a flavor kink. I was losing my mind from the sheer lack of seasoning. Vampire society outlawed strong spices. Garlic and onions were not just frowned upon, they were federally classified as level 1 biological weapons. The penalty for possession was death. But a man can only eat unseasoned boiled potatoes for so long before his soul starts to wither. Love can fade, empires can fall, but my need for a decent garlic butter roast was eternal. So, when the clock struck 2 a.m., I did not cower under my 1,000 thread count sheets. I grabbed a stolen silver spoon, stuffed a handful of contraband bulbs I had smuggled from the slums into my silk pajama pockets, and sneaked up to the 100th floor. The rooftop of the Obsidian Tower used to be a billion-dollar eco-project, a massive glass-domed hydroponic garden meant to show the public that the vampire elites cared about the environment. Naturally, they abandoned it a month later. Now it was a sprawling, overgrown jungle of dead vines and incredibly expensive, highly automated dirt. To them it was trash. To me, it was prime real estate. "All right, ladies," I whispered, kneeling in the rich, loamy soil. "Let us commit some light biological terrorism." For the next 2 hours, I was in my element. I forgot about the fangs, the blood taxes, and the fact that I was legally a beverage. I dug trenches with my silver spoon, calibrating the old hydroponic drip systems with the precision of a NASA engineer. I planted the onion sets and carefully buried the garlic cloves. The pungent, sharp, unmistakably illegal smell of raw garlic began to waft through the humid air of the greenhouse. It was glorious. It smelled like freedom. It smelled like a Brooklyn pizzeria on a Friday night. I was so deep in the zone, humming a country song and wiping mud across my face with the back of my hand, that I completely missed the warning signs. First, the ambient hum of the city below seemed to mute itself. Then the temperature in the greenhouse plummeted by a solid 20 degrees. The humid air turned crisp, carrying the faint metallic scent of ozone and chilled cedar wood. The security wards were triggered. A voice resonated. It was not loud, but it possessed a low vibrating frequency that rattled the marrow in my bones. I expected an assassin, a werewolf infiltration perhaps, not whatever this is. I froze. My heart executed a flawless backflip inside my chest. Standing at the entrance of the glass dome, silhouetted against the neon glow of the Neo-Manhattan skyline, was Vincent. He was wearing a perfectly tailored midnight blue three-piece suit that probably cost more than a private jet. Not a single silver hair was out of place. His violet eyes, glowing slightly in the dark, were locked onto me with a mixture of absolute disgust and terrifying curiosity. He looked at the mud on my silk pajamas. He looked at the dirt under my fingernails. And then his highly sensitive vampiric nose twitched. His eyes widened fractionally. The aura of cold superiority cracked for a microsecond, replaced by visceral shock. What is that noxious odor? Are you building a chemical bomb in my penthouse? Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I stood up. I was acutely aware that I looked like a feral raccoon caught in a Michelin star kitchen. In my right hand, held up near my chest, was a massive, perfectly formed bulb of hydroponic garlic. The moonlight filtering through the glass dome hit the white, papery skin of the bulb, making it gleam like a holy hand grenade, or an EMP ready to detonate. Vincent stepped forward, his leather shoes making zero sound on the concrete. The predatory pressure in the room skyrocketed. "Human," he hissed, his voice dangerously soft. "Put the weapon down." I looked at the garlic. Then I looked at the most dangerous man in America who was currently glaring at my seasoning like it was a live nuke. "Well, Jake, I thought gripping the garlic tighter. If you were going to go out, you might as well go out spicy." "Put it down." Vincent repeated his voice, dropping to a register that made the reinforced glass panels of the greenhouse vibrate. I looked at the garlic bulb in my hand. Then I looked at the multi-billionaire vampire CEO who could rip my spine out through my nose. My brain, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer, unadulterated desire to live long enough to eat a seasoned steak, went into overdrive. It is a flower," I blurted out, my voice cracking just a little. Vincent's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. The terrifying crimson glow in his violet eyes flickered with confusion. "A flower. That smells like aerosolized battery acid." "It is an Appalachian ghost orchid." I lied. The words flew out of my mouth with the desperate confidence of a college student defending a thesis they wrote 20 minutes ago. It is a highly specialized, incredibly rare therapeutic plant from the Midwest. I was gardening to manage my stress. Tribute anxiety. Vincent took a slow, deliberate step forward. The ambient temperature seemed to drop another 5 degrees. He tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over my mud-stained silk pajamas, the dirty silver spoon in my left hand, and, finally, my face. Anxiety. He murmured the word, rolling off his tongue like he was tasting an unfamiliar wine. He took another step. He was close now. Too close. I could smell the absurdly expensive cedarwood and ozone cologne he wore mixed with the faint metallic underlying scent of a predator. But more importantly, if he got any closer, his hypersensitive vampiric nose would definitely realize that my ghost orchid was actually just a pungent bulb of Italian seasoning. Panic flared in my chest. I instinctively took a sharp step backward, clutching the garlic to my chest. "Please do not come closer." It was a purely practical move to prevent my impending execution for biological terrorism, but Vincent did not know that. I watched as a profound, almost tragic shift occurred in his expression. The icy psychopathic glare melted into something dark, intense, and deeply unsettling. He stopped in his tracks, raising a placating hand. "I understand," Vincent said, his voice suddenly thick with a dangerous, possessive gentleness. "You pull away. You fear the chasm between us. I am the apex, the sovereign of the East, and you believe your status as a mere human tribute makes you unworthy of my proximity." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "It is strangely adorable." Vincent continued, his eyes darkening as he stared at my thoroughly panicked face. "You hide your delicate human frailty behind this obsessive midnight gardening. You cultivate defensive flora to soothe your fragile psyche. I have never met a creature so terrified, yet so resilient. I am not resilient. I am just trying to make garlic bread." I thought, absolutely paralyzed by this monumental misunderstanding. Before I could correct him, the glass ceiling above us shattered. A shower of tempered glass rained down like lethal diamonds. I hit the dirt, covering my head. A figure dropped from the night sky, landing in the center of the greenhouse with a heavy, dramatic thud. It was a vampire. He was wearing a tactical black suit, his fangs fully extended, his eyes glowing a sickly, venomous green. I recognized him from the Dark Knight corporate directory, Senator Thorne, one of the pure-blood traditionalists who openly despised Vincent's modernization of the blood tax. "Vincent," Thorne roared, drawing 2 serrated silver blades. "Your reign of corporate tyranny ends tonight. The Obsidian Council will no longer bow to a CEO who coddles humans." Vincent did not even flinch. He slowly turned away from me, brushing a shard of glass off the shoulder of his Armani suit. The gentle, possessive aura he had just directed at me vanished, replaced instantly by an aura of absolute world-ending violence. "It's the Thorn," Vincent sighed, sounding incredibly bored. "You are tracking mud on my hydroponic tiles." "Die!" Thorn shrieked, lunging forward with terrifying supernatural speed. He vaulted into the air, aiming a lethal downward strike right at Vincent's neck. It was a flawless assassination maneuver, except he did not factor in my agriculture. Thorn landed right in the middle of trench number 4. The soil there was heavily irrigated, incredibly slick, and packed with a freshly crushed, highly concentrated layer of contraband garlic and onion sets. His expensive leather combat boots hit the wet mud. He slipped. With a very unvampiric yelp, Thorn's legs went out from under him. He launched face first into the dirt, his face planted directly into a massive, pungent cluster of raw, bruised garlic cloves. The reaction was instantaneous. Thorn shrieked a high, bubbling sound of pure agony. The concentrated allicin gases hit his hypersensitive vampiric respiratory system like tear gas. He rolled onto his back, clawing at his throat, his eyes streaming tears of blood. My eyes, the burning, the unholy burning, he wailed, thrashing wildly. White foam began to gather at the corners of his mouth. Within 10 seconds, his eyes rolled back into his head, and he went completely limp, knocked out cold by an onion. Silence descended upon the greenhouse. The only sound was the hum of the climate control system and the faint hiss of the bubbling garlic. I slowly peeked out from behind a row of overgrown tomato vines. Vincent was standing over the unconscious senator, his silver blades lying useless in the mud. He stared at Thorn. Then slowly he turned his head and stared at me. "You," Vincent whispered, his voice laced with profound awe. He looked at the mud trenches, then at the bulb of garlic still clutched in my hand. "You did not just plant a therapeutic garden, you engineered a localized bio-magical defense perimeter." I stuttered, slowly getting to my feet. "Surprise?" Vincent crossed the room in a blur. He stopped exactly 3 feet away, respecting my fragile boundaries, and looked at me like I was the most fascinating, brilliant creature on the planet. From his pristine suit pocket, he pulled out a sleek, heavy, matte black metallic card, an unlimited Obsidian corporate Amex. He tossed it, and it landed perfectly at my feet. "Consider this funding for your Appalachian ghost orchids," Vincent declared, his eyes burning with an intense, terrifying devotion. "You are hereby appointed as the senior botanist of the Dark Knight Corporation." I stared at the black card. Unlimited funds. Holy shit. "And Jake," Vincent added, his voice dropping to a low, possessive purr that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Pack your belongings. You are moving out of the tribute quarters immediately. For your own safety, you will reside in my personal penthouse suite. I will not have my most valuable asset targeted." He turned and walked out, his cape billowing behind him, leaving me alone with a black card, an unconscious assassin, and a very strong smell of garlic. Well, I thought, picking up the card, at least I can finally buy some decent butter. Living in Vincent's personal penthouse was exactly like being a rare, pampered zoo animal. If the zoo was designed by Prada and the zookeeper was a homicidal billionaire who stared at you while you slept. Technically, my life was perfect. I had an unlimited Obsidian Amex. I was the legally untouchable senior botanist of the Dark Knight Corporation, but beneath the silk sheets and the imported caviar, the soul of a Midwest agricultural capitalist was restless. I had to supply a thriving, heavily guarded hydroponic garden of premium garlic and onions. Now I just needed the demand. I found it on the loading docks of the Obsidian Tower. The werewolves of Neo-Manhattan were relegated to the Bronx. They were the blue-collar workforce mechanics, delivery drivers, biker gangs. According to vampire law, strong spices were strictly prohibited to prevent the wolves from masking their scent or inciting feral behavior. Basically, the vampires forced them to eat unseasoned chicken breast for a century. I cornered a massive scarred werewolf delivery driver near the service elevator one Tuesday. I slipped him a single perfectly cured garlic clove wrapped in foil. "Put this in your marinara sauce," I whispered. "First hit is free." By Thursday, I was not just a tribute anymore. I was the Green Thumb. The underground spice market exploded. The Bronx biker gangs were practically howling at the moon for my produce. But I was not going to accept dirty street cash. I was a modern entrepreneur. We operated on a strict barter system. A Ziploc bag of crushed garlic got me a custom-built top-tier espresso machine. 3 pounds of premium yellow onions scored me a PlayStation 6 with a VR headset. A weekly supply of scallions secured a memory foam mattress that did not feel like a Victorian coffin. I even optimized my operations. To prevent any unauthorized harvesting, I leveraged my senior botanist title. I called in the elite vampire security detail, handing them clipboards and a very serious expression. "The Appalachian ghost orchids are in a critical blooming phase," I told the terrifying, heavily armed vampire captain. "I need round-the-clock perimeter patrols. If I do not see a 15% increase in your patrol efficiency, KPE is by Friday. I am telling Vincent you compromised my therapeutic environment." The captain literally paled and saluted me. My illegal garlic farm was now being guarded by the most lethal strike force on the East Coast. Capitalism is a beautiful thing. Of course, the massive influx of contraband seasoning in the city did not go unnoticed. "It is an insult to my empire," Vincent hissed one evening. He was pacing the length of the penthouse, his Armani suit jacket discarded, his eyes glowing a furious radioactive violet. He looked incredibly hot in a terrifying "I might level a city block" kind of way. "The Federation of Blood Investigators, the FBI, is utterly useless." Vincent continued, his voice vibrating with rage. "There is a kingpin operating in my city, a phantom supplying the K-9 district with biological weaponry. They call him the Green Thumb." I sat on my newly acquired werewolf-smuggled plush velvet sofa, holding a very nice cup of espresso. I swallowed hard. "Wow, that sounds really bad, Vinny." "It is an epidemic, Jake," Vincent said, stopping in front of me. The anger in his face melted into that deeply unsettling, possessive gentleness as he looked down at me. He reached out his cold fingers, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "The air in the lower districts is polluted with this vile stench. It makes me physically ill. But do not worry, my fragile flower. I will not let this underworld filth reach our sanctuary." "Oh, thank God," I squeaked aggressively, sipping my espresso to hide my face. "I feel so safe." "I have ordered a total crackdown," Vincent declared, his eyes darkening. "I will find this Green Thumb, and when I do, I will personally rip his spine out and hang him from the Brooklyn Bridge as a warning." I choked on my coffee, violently coughing into my sleeve. "Careful, my treasure," Vincent murmured, patting my back with enough suppressed strength to dent a car door. The real crisis hit 3 nights later. I was in the middle of a heated PS6 boss fight when the penthouse doors blew open. Vincent strode in looking like a god of war who had just walked through a hurricane. His suit was slightly rumpled, his cape was torn, and his fangs were fully extended. "We raided a warehouse in the Bronx," Vincent announced, breathing heavily. The sheer predatory aura rolling off him made the smart lights in the room flicker. "Oh," I squeaked, pausing my game. Did you catch the guy?" "No." "The Green Thumb is elusive, a mastermind of the highest order," Vincent growled, sounding almost begrudgingly impressed. "But we seized his latest shipment." He walked over to the glass coffee table and dropped a heavy, transparent tactical evidence bag onto it. I stared at the bag. My heart completely stopped. Inside the evidence bag was roughly 2 pounds of my finest hand-minced garlic swimming in high-grade olive oil. It was my signature white product. "The FBI alchemists are baffled," Vincent said, his voice dropping into a low, serious register. He looked at the bag with pure, unadulterated disgust. "They do not understand the chemical composition. It burns our senses, yet the werewolves treat it like ambrosia." He turned to me. His violet eyes were intense, filled with an unwavering absolute trust that made my stomach twist into a knot of pure panic. "Jake," Vincent said softly, "you are my senior botanist. You understand flora better than anyone in this wretched city." He nudged the bag of minced garlic toward me. "Analyze this," the apex predator of the East Coast commanded. "Tell me what kind of dark, twisted magic this Green Thumb is using to synthesize this poison." I looked at the garlic. Then I looked at Vincent. Well, I thought mentally, preparing my last will and testament. It was a good run. The Obsidian Met Gala was exactly what you would expect when you put 1,000 blood-sucking aristocrats in a single ballroom and gave them an unlimited budget. It was basically a networking event for undead sociopaths, heavily decorated with crushed velvet and bad intentions. I was wearing a custom-tailored dark emerald Tom Ford suit that Vincent had personally selected. It cost more than my entire undergraduate degree. I felt like $1 million, which was a nice distraction from the fact that I was currently the prime suspect in my own biological terrorism investigation. Vincent had left the bag of white product on his desk, promising to interrogate me about it after the gala. I had about 3 hours to figure out how to explain that my rare therapeutic orchids were currently being sautéed by the Bronx biker gangs. I was hiding near the artisanal ice sculpture, aggressively drinking sparkling water, when a massive shadow blocked my view of the buffet. I looked up. Standing there was a man who looked like a lumberjack who had been violently shoved into a tuxedo. He was 7 feet tall, smelled vaguely of wet dog and motor oil, and had a very familiar scar over his left eye. It was Axel the Alpha of the Bronx Werewolves and my #1 wholesale client, Thumb. Axel rumbled, leaning in close so his voice would not carry over the string quartet. His golden eyes were wide, twitching with a frantic, unhinged energy. "Man, you gotta help me out. My pack is losing it. We finished the onions on Tuesday. We need a restock." "Are you insane?" I hissed, looking around frantically. "You cannot talk to me here. I am legally a beverage, and the feds just seized 2 pounds of my premium minced garlic. We are laying low." "I cannot lay low, bro." Axel whined, a terrifying sound coming from a guy who could bench press a minivan. "I had a taste of that garlic butter. I saw God Jake. I saw him. You cannot put me back on unseasoned boiled chicken. I will go feral. I will bite a senator. Listen to me, you oversized golden retriever," I snapped, grabbing the lapels of his straining tuxedo. "If you do not back away right now, the apex predator of the East Coast is going to turn us both into ashes." The ambient temperature in the ballroom suddenly dropped to sub-zero. The string quartet missed a note. The chatter of the aristocrats died instantly. I slowly turned my head. Standing 10 feet away was Vincent. He looked devastatingly gorgeous in a jet black formal cape, but his eyes were a swirling radioactive violet. He was not just looking at Axel, he was looking at the werewolf like he was a stain on the carpet that needed to be surgically removed with a flamethrower. Axel whimpered, let go of my suit, and practically moonwalked into the crowd to escape. Before I could even take a breath, Vincent was in front of me. He did not say a word. He grabbed my wrist, his grip tight and freezing cold, and dragged me out of the ballroom, down a dimly lit mahogany corridor, and straight into a private VIP cloakroom. He slammed the heavy oak door shut and locked it. "Vincent, I can explain. I started backing up until my spine hit a row of expensive fur coats. He was just asking for directions to the restrooms. He was smelling you." Vincent snarled, his fangs fully extended. He paced the small room like a caged panther, the sheer force of his possessive aura making the coat hangers rattle. "That mongrel was inhaling your scent. He looked at you like you were his salvation." "Well, strictly speaking, I am his culinary salvation," I thought, but I kept my mouth shut. "I have been too lenient." Vincent continued, his voice dropping into a dark, terrifying register. He stopped pacing and turned to me. "I allowed you to walk among them, hoping you would feel the freedom of this new life. But they look at you, Jake. They see the fragile, exquisite life inside you, and they covet what is mine." He stepped closer, closing the distance until his chest was brushing against mine. Panic seized my throat, and not just because a homicidal vampire was having a yandere meltdown in a closet. I panicked because approximately 30 minutes before leaving the penthouse, I had been stress eating. I had snuck into the kitchen and aggressively consumed an entire baguette smothered in my private stash of garlic butter. If Vincent leaned in, if his hypersensitive nose caught even a whiff of my breath, he would instantly connect the dots. He would realize his delicate therapeutic botanist was actually the Walter White of Italian seasoning. "I will not tolerate their eyes on you," Vincent whispered, raising a hand to cup my cheek. His thumb brushed over my lower lip. "I must make it clear. I must leave a mark that no werewolf or aristocrat can ignore." He tilted his head, his eyes locking onto the pulse point at my neck. He was going to bite me. He was going to bite me right now, and the proximity would expose my garlic breath. "Think, Jake, think," my brain screamed. "Deploy countermeasures." Vincent leaned down, his mouth opening. I did the only logical thing a panicked Midwest agriculture student could do. I grabbed the lapels of his Armani suit, yanked him down, and smashed my lips directly against his. Vincent completely froze. I kissed him desperately, keeping my mouth clamped tight against his, hoping to God that the sheer physical shock would short-circuit his brain before his olfactory senses kicked in. His lips were cold smooth and rigid with shock. For 3 agonizing seconds, I was basically kissing a very handsome, very confused marble statue. Then the chemistry happened. The concentrated Allison gas from my garlic-heavy dinner hit his system. Vincent violently wrenched himself back, breaking the kiss. He stumbled, hitting the heavy oak door. His chest heaved. A deep, unnatural flush spread across his normally pale cheeks. His eyes widened, and he brought a trembling hand up to his own chest, right over where his dead heart was supposed to be. "Oh no," I thought, terrified. "I poisoned him. I literally just pepper sprayed the Emperor with my mouth. "Vincent," I squeaked, raising my hands in surrender. "I am sorry, I just panicked." "My God," Vincent gasped. He looked at me, his violet eyes blown wide with an emotion that looked suspiciously like religious awe. The flush on his cheeks deepened. He was actually sweating something vampires were not supposed to be able to do. "Jake," Vincent whispered, his voice trembling with a raw, aching vulnerability. "What did you just do to me?" "I kissed you," I offered, internally writing my will. "I am burning," Vincent breathed, sliding down the door slightly. He looked at me as if I had just handed him the secrets of the universe. My chest. It is so hot. I can feel my blood racing. It has been 500 years since I felt a fever. He looked at his trembling hands, then back at me, his gaze softening into a terrifying, absolute adoration. "The human literature it spoke of, this," Vincent murmured completely, misinterpreting his severe allergic reaction to my garlic breath. "They said the heat of true, unbridled human passion could melt even an undead heart. I thought it was a myth, a poetic exaggeration." I stared at him. He thinks the garlic poisoning is the power of love. Vincent staggered forward and collapsed against me, burying his flushed face in the crook of my neck. He felt like a furnace, his arms wrapped around my waist in a crushing, desperate grip. "You are poison, my fragile flower," Vincent whispered raggedly against my skin, shivering. "You undo me completely, but I cannot stop. I am addicted." I stood there holding the most dangerous man in America as he suffered a romanticized allergic reaction and gently patted his back. Well, I thought looking up at the ceiling. At least I did not get bitten. Surviving the Met Gala kiss had a deeply unfortunate side effect. Vincent had upgraded my status from fragile therapeutic botanist to literal deity of human passion. For 3 straight days, the apex predator of the East Coast hovered around me like a lethal Armani-clad helicopter parent. He insisted on carrying me over minor puddles. He aggressively glared at the ambient air conditioning if I shivered. I could not even sneeze without him mobilizing a team of vampire medics. It was exhausting. So, on a stormy Tuesday night, while Vincent was supposedly dismantling a rival corporate faction in a boardroom, I snuck up to the 100th floor greenhouse. I needed the quiet. More importantly, I needed to check on my prized assets, a genetically optimized, highly illegal batch of Vidalia onions I lovingly called the Big Berthas. I was humming a cheerful country tune, gently misting the loamy soil with nutrient water, when the heavy steel doors of the greenhouse were violently blown off their hinges. The blast knocked me flat into a patch of premium rosemary. I scrambled to my knees, coughing through the dust. Standing in the doorway were 6 vampires. They were not corporate security. They wore matte black tactical gear, bearing the crest of the pure-blood traditionalists, the same guys who hated Vincent's modern regime. "The biological source is here," the leader hissed. His fangs were fully extended, his eyes a sickly, venomous yellow. He raised a heavy military-grade flamethrower. "Burn the bioterrorist. Purge this filth from the obsidian tower." Time slowed down. A normal human in my position would have screamed, prayed to a higher power, or accepted their imminent death. But I was not a normal human. I was an agricultural entrepreneur who had spent 3 months carefully balancing the pH levels of this soil. Do you have any idea what the profit margin on a pound of black market shallots is? A wave of pure Midwest capitalist rage washed over me. The instinct for survival was instantly replaced by the primal need to protect my inventory. The leader pulled the trigger. A stream of liquid fire arced through the air, landing directly in trench number 3. My scallions. They set fire to my beautiful high-yield scallions. "Oh, hell no," I snarled. I did not run away. I dove under the main hydroponic table and yanked open a hidden compartment. Inside was my custom-built tactical belt. It was mostly populated with gardening shears and Ziploc bags, but it also housed my latest defensive prototypes. If I was going to live in a city of bloodsuckers, I was not going to do it unarmed. The leader strode into the room, scanning the smoke. "Find him. The Emperor's pet must be punished." I popped up from behind a tomato trellis. "Hey, Twilight," I yelled. He turned just in time to see me pull the pin on a custom-made spherical device. I lobbed it like a baseball perfectly at his chest. A loud popping sound echoed in the room. The device exploded. A dense pale yellow cloud of pure weaponized Allison gas rapidly expanded across a 20-foot radius. The reaction was catastrophic. The traditionalist leader did not just scream, he let out a high-pitched, bubbly shriek that sounded like a deflating balloon. He dropped his flamethrower, falling to his knees and furiously clawing at his bleeding, rapidly swelling eyes. My retinas. The burning. It is the fire of hell itself. He wailed, thrashing in the dirt. That is just vitamin C, you dramatic bat, I muttered. 2 more assassins lunged at me through the stinging cloud holding silver blades. I did not flinch. I unholstered my secondary weapon, the vampire mace. It was a pressurized aerosol can filled with 100% pure cold-pressed garlic essential oil. I held down the nozzle, spraying a concentrated jet of Italian seasoning directly into their faces. They hit the ground like a ton of bricks. White foam bubbled from their lips as their hypersensitive olfactory systems completely shut down. They were out cold, smelling deliciously like a garlic bread appetizer. I was currently winning a 1 versus 6 fight against supernatural assassins using nothing but soup ingredients. I felt like a god. But my triumph was short-lived. The remaining 3 vampires, realizing what I was doing, pulled up their tactical gas masks. They moved in a blur, surrounding me in a lethal triangle. One of them kicked the vampire mace out of my hand. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the cold glass of the greenhouse wall. Your spices will not save you now, human, the assassin sneered, raising a jagged dagger. Before he could swing, the storm raging outside the glass dome seemed to stop. The thunder did not crash. It was silenced by a sound far more terrifying. The massive reinforced glass ceiling above us shattered into a million pieces. A figure dropped from the sky, landing in the center of the greenhouse with an impact that cracked the concrete foundation. It was Vincent. He was wearing his tailored tuxedo, but his suit jacket was shredded. His violet eyes were not just glowing, they were practically bleeding raw radioactive power. Shadows whipped around him like living, furious serpents. He looked at the burning scallions. Then he looked at me, cornered against the wall. "You," Vincent whispered, his voice vibrating with an apocalyptic, world-ending fury. "You dared to threaten my heart." It was not a fight. It was a corporate restructuring of their biological status. In a fraction of a second, Vincent was a blur of absolute violence. He did not use weapons. He used his bare hands. The 3 masked assassins were dismantled with extreme, terrifying efficiency. Within 10 seconds, the threat was entirely neutralized, and Vincent was tossing the last unconscious body into a pile of fertilizer. The battle was over, but a new crisis was just beginning. I dropped to my knees in the dirt, my hands covering my face, and began to sob uncontrollably. I could not help it. My shoulders shook, and huge, heavy tears streamed down my face. I gasped for air, making pathetic, high-pitched whimpering sounds. In a literal second, Vincent's terrifying, bloodthirsty aura vanished. He dropped to his knees in the mud next to me, completely ignoring the fact that his expensive pants were getting ruined. He reached out with trembling hands, gently pulling my face toward his chest. "Jake, my love, my fragile, beautiful soul." Vincent breathed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He wrapped his arms around me in a crushing, desperate hug. "I am here. You are safe. I am so deeply sorry I was late. Please do not cry. It breaks what little remains of my soul." He brushed my hair back desperately, trying to wipe away the flood of tears on my cheeks. I'm not traumatized. I wanted to scream. The ventilation system is broken. Because I was not crying out of fear. I was crying because my onion flashbang had heavily concentrated the air with sulfur gas, and it was currently burning my corneas with the intensity of 1,000 suns. I literally could not open my eyes without experiencing excruciating agricultural pain. "Vinny." I choked out a fresh wave of onion-induced tears soaking his expensive silk shirt. It burned so bad. Vincent completely misinterpreted this. He looked at the smoking ruins of my hydroponic beds, then back at my weeping face. His expression shifted into something darkly romantic and utterly unhinged. "They burned your therapeutic orchids," Vincent whispered, his eyes narrowing as he glared at the unconscious assassins. "They tried to take away your sanctuary. They made you shed tears of despair." "No, it is the Big Berthas," I sobbed aggressively, rubbing my eyes. "I swear to you, Jake," Vincent vowed, pulling me tighter against his cold, solid chest. "I will level this entire state. I will strip the traditionalists of their wealth, and I will buy you a new continent. You will have a garden so vast, the gods themselves will weep." I just nodded, burying my face in his neck to escape the onion fumes. "Well, I thought sniffing pathetically. A whole continent of farmland. That is a pretty good return on investment for a few burnt scallions." The Supreme Blood Council of Neo-Manhattan was essentially a boardroom designed by an edgy medieval architect. The walls were black marble, the lighting was dramatically poor, and the 12 ancient, impossibly wealthy vampires sitting around the massive obsidian table looked like they were ready to order my execution for an appetizer. My secret identity as the Green Thumb had lasted exactly 4 days after the greenhouse fire. The FBI, the Federation of Blood Investigators, had traced the sulfur residue on my tactical boots. I was standing in the center of the room. I was not wearing my silk pajamas anymore. I was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit. If I was going to be put on trial for biological terrorism, I was going to do it with good posture and a high thread count. At the head of the table sat Vincent. He did not look like a CEO. Right now he looked like a dormant volcano. His violet eyes were practically glowing with suppressed apocalyptic rage. He was digging his manicured nails into the armrests of his throne so hard, the enchanted mahogany was splintering. I knew exactly what he was waiting for. If one council member even breathed in my direction with violent intent, Vincent was going to slaughter the entire board and start a civil war. The evidence is irrefutable, hissed Duke Valerius, a pureblood who looked like a walking corpse wrapped in Prada. He tossed a plastic evidence bag onto the table. Inside was a single slightly charred clove of garlic. The human known as Jake is not a botanist. He is the Green Thumb. He has been cultivating a Class 1 biological weapon in our very own headquarters and distributing it to the canine slums. The council erupted into furious, aristocratic whispering. "He is poisoning our city," a baroness shrieked. "He seeks to overthrow the bloodlines with his foul-smelling roots. Death, death by 1,000 cuts." Vincent stood up. The temperature in the room instantly plummeted to sub-zero. The whispering died immediately. "If anyone suggests harming a single hair on his head," Vincent rumbled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, possessive frequency, "I will ensure your bloodline ends today. He is my consort. If he grew this poison, it was because you wretched fools drove him to it with your archaic, suffocating politics." Oh my God, he is so dramatic, I thought, suppressing a sigh. It was sweet that he was ready to burn down the government for me. But a civil war is terrible for supply chains. I needed a stable market. "Thank you, Your Majesty," I interrupted, stepping forward and adjusting my tie. "But I do not need a pardon. I need someone to dim the lights." The council blinked. Vincent stopped glaring at the Duke and looked at me, his head tilting in confusion. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a heavily modified Dark Knight Corp smart remote, and clicked a button. A massive high-definition holographic projection flared to life behind me. The title slide read, "Garlic, the Cure for Supernatural Scurvy, a series, a funding pitch. Ladies and gentlemen of the board." I began pacing the front of the room with the unearned confidence of a tech bro in a turtleneck. "For centuries, you have banned strong spices. You claimed it was a biological weapon. You claimed it incited the blood frenzy, the degenerative disease that causes older vampires to lose their minds and go feral." I clicked to the next slide. It showed a pie chart. "You were wrong. You are not being poisoned. You are malnourished." "Insolence!" Valerius roared, slamming his fist on the table. "You dare lecture us on our biology, you glorified juicebox?" "I am a premium juicebox Valerius and I have the floor," I snapped back. I pointed my laser pointer at a graph. "Your exclusive diet of human blood lacks critical micronutrients, specifically highly concentrated, organically synthesized allicin. You do not have a magical curse. You have a dietary deficiency. It is supernatural scurvy." I clicked my fingers. The heavy double doors opened. 2 heavily armored and very confused security guards dragged in a feral vampire. He was thrashing his eyes milky white, snapping his jaws wildly. He was in the late stages of the blood frenzy. "Watch," I commanded. I walked right up to the feral beast. I did not flinch. I pulled a sleek, golden gelatin capsule out of my pocket. It was a highly refined, odorless pill containing 100% pure garlic essential oil. I shoved it directly into the feral vampire's mouth and held his jaw shut until he swallowed. The council held its breath. Vincent stepped closer, his body tensed, ready to rip the feral apart if it lunged at me. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the feral vampire stopped thrashing. The milky white film faded from his eyes. He blinked, looking around the opulent boardroom in complete bewilderment. "Good heavens," the vampire whispered, his voice perfectly cultured and sane. "Why am I wearing a burlap sack? And who ruined the mahogany armrests?" The boardroom exploded, not with anger, but with absolute unadulterated shock. Vampires were standing up, knocking over their crystal goblets. "It cured him," the Baroness gasped, clutching her pearls. "Instantly, the frenzy is cured." "Exactly," I said, clicking to the final slide, which displayed a massive QR code. The Bronx werewolves knew it made them feel better, which is why they bought my raw product. But raw garlic burns your sensitive palates. That is why I developed these coated slow-release gel capsules. I leaned against the table, steepling my fingers. I call it Aura Premium. It is a health supplement, and I have the only proprietary formula in the world. Duke Valerius, who 5 minutes ago wanted me executed, was practically vibrating with capitalist greed. "How much? Name your price, human. I need 100 crates for my estate." "It is not for sale outright, Duke," I smirked, tapping the side of my head. "It is a subscription model, 5,000 obsidian credits a month per vampire, with a 12-month lock-in period. If you want your sanity, you pay the monthly fee. Scan the QR code to set up your direct debit." It was a massacre. Ancient terrifying lords of the night were frantically pulling out their heavily encrypted smartphones, shoving each other out of the way to get a clear shot of the QR code. The sound of successful digital transactions began pinging off my tablet like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. I looked over at Vincent. He was not looking at the chaos. He was looking at me. His violet eyes were wide, completely dilated, and practically shining with a terrifying religious awe. I had just walked into a trial for my life, diagnosed an ancient race with scurvy, and established a pharmaceutical monopoly in under 10 minutes. To a ruthless billionaire apex predator like Vincent, this was apparently the most romantic thing he had ever witnessed in his 500-year existence. Vincent slowly walked over to me, ignoring the frantic aristocrats. He did not care about the cure. He grabbed my waist, pulling me flush against his immaculate suit, his eyes burning into mine. "You?" Vincent breathed, his voice a low, obsessive purr that sent a shiver straight down my spine. "You are an absolute monster, a brilliant, manipulative, cold-blooded capitalist. Just trying to diversify our portfolio, Vinny," I whispered, resting my hands on his chest. Vincent turned to the scrambling council. "Silence," he commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. The room froze. Vincent wrapped his arm tighter around my waist, lifting his chin. "All charges are dropped. Furthermore, Jake is hereby appointed as the vice president of the Dark Knight Corporation. He answers to no one but me." He looked back down at me, his thumb brushing my lower lip in front of the entire terrified board of directors. "You survived the end of the world, my exquisite mastermind," Vincent murmured, completely lost in his own yandere narrative. "And now you own this one." I just smiled, listening to my tablet ping with another 5,000 credits. God bless America, I thought. And God bless high-yield agriculture. 1 year. That is all it took to transition the entire socio-economic foundation of Neo-America from a dystopian, blood-sucking nightmare into a heavily monopolized, highly lucrative agricultural empire. As it turns out, the power of a recurring revenue model is far more terrifying than any vampire army. Aura Premium, my patented slow-release garlic supplement, was a massive continent-spanning success. Once the ancient aristocratic vampires realized that my pills did not just cure the blood frenzy, but also cleared their skin, boosted their energy, and stopped them from wanting to murder their neighbors, the demand skyrocketed. The blood tax was entirely abolished. In its place, the Supreme Council implemented a 15% mandatory health and wellness tax payable directly to the Dark Knight Corporation. I was officially the youngest billionaire on the Forbes Neo-America list. Technically, you could argue I was a sugar baby made billionaire, but seeing as I engineered the proprietary Allison formula while trying not to get executed, I felt the equity split was completely fair. We were not living in the Obsidian Tower penthouse anymore. Upstate New York had been entirely bought out, walled off, and rebranded as the Obsidian Valley. It was a sprawling 10,000-acre mega farm that looked less like a traditional agricultural plot and more like a heavily fortified military base. I had elite vampire mercenaries in UV-resistant tactical gear actively patrolling the perimeters of my scallion fields with sniper rifles. Axel the giant werewolf from the Bronx had been promoted to vice president of global logistics. He now wore custom-tailored suits that still smelled faintly of wet dog, and he commanded a fleet of 18-wheelers that distributed Italian seasoning across the eastern seaboard. It was a beautiful hyper-capitalist utopia. All right, let us test the suspension on this bad boy, I muttered to myself, adjusting my designer aviator sunglasses. I was currently sitting in the driver's seat of a custom-built top-of-the-line John Deere tractor, but it was not green and yellow. It was matte black, and the entire exterior was plated in solid enchanted silver. When I told Vincent I wanted to drive a tractor to survey the land, he had a mild panic attack, assumed a rival cartel would try to snipe me out of the cabin, and ordered his engineers to build a farming vehicle that could technically survive a direct missile strike. It had bulletproof glass military-grade GPS and a really nice espresso machine built into the dashboard. I fired up the engine. It hummed with a terrifying, vibrating purr, completely devoid of exhaust fumes because it ran on a highly illegal mixture of diesel and dark magic. I was halfway down the third row of my new hybrid Vidalia onions, admiring the loamy, perfectly pH-balanced soil, when a shadow detached itself from the nearest oak tree. In the blink of an eye, the tractor's passenger door was yanked open. Vincent stepped into the air-conditioned cabin looking completely flawless in a three-piece charcoal suit, a dark silk tie, and a pair of $2,000 Berluti loafers that were now tragically covered in premium fertilizer. He looked like the apex predator. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating an aura of world-ending authority. There was just one minor detail ruining his terrifying aesthetic. Firmly clamped over his perfect aristocratic nose was a custom-made diamond-encrusted silver clothespin. "You are tracking mud onto the heated floor mats, Vinny," I pointed out, leaning back in my leather captain's chair and taking a sip of my espresso. "A trivial sacrifice," Vincent replied. His deep, commanding voice sounded incredibly nasally due to the clothespin. "I told you not to come out to the outer fields alone, Jake. The tree lines are dense. Someone could be watching you." "The only people watching me are your 6 snipers stationed in the silos," I said, gesturing out of the window. "And frankly, the only thing out here is 60 acres of heavily concentrated sulfur gas, which is why you are wearing laundry equipment on your face." Vincent glared at the sprawling fields of onions and garlic out of the window with profound, unadulterated hatred. He despised the farm. The smell made his highly sensitive vampiric eyes water, and the sheer volume of Alyssum in the air gave him a constant low-grade migraine. But he refused to leave my side. Vincent ignored the agricultural hazard around us. He stepped over the gear shift, crowded into my space, and effortlessly pulled me out of the driver's seat. He sat down and pulled me sideways onto his lap, wrapping his strong, cold arms securely around my waist. "I am protecting my investment," Vincent murmured, burying his face in the crook of my neck. Even with his nose pinched shut, his lips were soft and cold against my pulse point. "You are the heart of my empire. If a single leaf in this wretched, foul-smelling paradise were to scratch you, I would salt the earth and burn it all to ash." I sighed, running my hand through his perfectly styled silver hair. "Please do not salt the earth, babe. It ruins the pH levels. Do you have any idea how much I spent on nitrogen fertilizer this quarter?" Vincent tilted his head, his glowing violet eyes looking up at me with that familiar, terrifying religious devotion. 1 year later, and he was still completely lost in his own twisted narrative. He did not see a guy checking crop yields. He saw a ruthless, brilliant mastermind who had brought an ancient species to its knees with a root vegetable. "You are a monster," Vincent whispered affectionately, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "You conquered the world, and now you sit upon your silver throne, making the dirt itself bow to your will. It is just a tractor, Vinny. It is a chariot of dominance," he corrected, pulling me flush against his chest. "And you are magnificent." I could not help it. I laughed, leaning down to press a kiss to his forehead. He immediately tightened his grip on my waist, practically vibrating with possessive satisfaction. I looked out the bulletproof windshield at the endless rows of green shoots stretching toward the horizon. The sun was shining. My profit margins were up by 400%, and the most dangerous, terrifying billionaire in America was currently functioning as my personal seatbelt, wearing a nose clip just so he could cuddle me while I farmed. I survived the end of the world, I evaded a biological terrorism charge, and I somehow accidentally tamed a yandere vampire lord. God bless America, I thought, resting my head against Vincent's shoulder as the silver tractor rolled forward. And God bless the free market.